All right, 1:30 Central Time now, and today we're joined by Berkeley Law professor David Oppenheimer, whose new book, The Diversity Principle, traces 2 centuries of scholarship behind the idea that diversity strengthens education, democracy, business, and scientific progress. At a moment of national debate over DEI, he offers a timely, historically grounded look at what's truly at stake. Professor Oppenheimer, thank you for your time today. I sure appreciate you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, most people think the argument for diversity starts with modern affirmative action cases or today's DEI debates, but in your book, you trace it back nearly 2 centuries to thinkers like Humboldt and Mill. What pushed you to look back that far, and what did you find that reshaped your understanding of the diversity principle?
Well, I started in the 1970s, but I kept finding that the further I went, the further I could go. That the ideas around affirmative action in the 1970s were connected to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, were connected to the idea of a marketplace of ideas for free speech law and for academic freedom at the turn of the 20th century, were connected to John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill and the idea that liberty requires diversity in the mid 19th century, and finally, all the way back to the founding of the first modern research university, the University of Berlin, in 1810. Each of
You,
these institutions was founded on the diversity principle, the idea that when you bring people together with different backgrounds and different experiences, including people of different ages and religions and races and ethnicities and genders, that they make better decisions. They learn more from each other. They make more significant scientific discoveries. In business, they make more money.
yeah. What surprised you most when researching 2 centuries of intellectual history behind diversity?
The people who I had never heard of, who played such an important role, and there were three in particular, three women, two from the 19th century, one from the 20th, who were enormously influential, but whose voices have just sort of disappeared. So the first was Caroline von Humboldt, who was married to Wilhelm von Humboldt, who was
Mm-hmm.
the founder of modern linguistics and the founder of the University of Berlin and a dozen other remarkable accomplishments. And she was the poet and playwright Goethe called her the most remarkable woman of her time. And she's virtually unknown now. Um, Second, Harriet Taylor Mill, who it turned out was John Stuart Mill's co author on virtually everything he wrote and principal author on some of his books, but again has just sort of been bypassed. And finally, in our century, Pauli Murray, who had enormous influence on the desegregation cases of the 1940s and 50s, enormous influence on the sex discrimination cases of the 1960s and the 1970s and 80s, and then at the height of a remarkable legal career, became an Episcopal priest, and a few years ago was made a saint in the Episcopal Church. Remarkable, remarkable woman who I hadn't known anything about, but they brought diversity to the diversity principle, and they were major contributors to moving this principle from decade to decade and era to era and field to field until we got where we are today, where there's all this empirical evidence from scientists that tells us that the diversity principle is real, that there really is a measurable value from putting people together who are different and asking them to work together to solve problems together, etc.
You argue that diversity principle isn't ideological, but today many people see diversity efforts as politically based, loaded. How do you respond to critics who say diversity is inherently a political project, not a neutral educational principle?
Well, I really welcome opportunities to talk with people who feel that way and to lend our joint viewpoints to explore it. And I think that most people who see diversity as a political project and as a liberal project at the same time would agree that viewpoint diversity is important, is valuable. In fact, would say, and I agree with them, that we don't have enough viewpoint diversity in many of our universities, that we need more conservative voices so that everyone in a university is exposed to a wide variety of ideas. If they agree on that much, and I think they do, then the question is there something about gender, race, religion, age, disability that contributes to the way we form our viewpoints, the underlying basis of our viewpoints? And let me give you one example
Hmm.
regarding someone who, in many ways, I admire very much, although he is certainly not a hero of those who advocate for diversity. And that is Justice Clarence Thomas, who for many years was the only Black American serving on the U.S. Supreme Court. And in a case called Black v. Virginia, the 8 white people on the court agreed that burning a cross is a statement which is political. It's a political statement and it deserves, to some extent, First Amendment recognition. Justice Thomas wrote this brilliant, eloquent decision in which he said, no, you're missing the point. Burning a cross is an act of intimidation and terrorism. He came to that point because of his experience as a Black American. Now, it's not that he's a liberal, he's not. But
Hmm.
although actually his decisions on civil procedure, which is a course I teach, I actually think are quite liberal. But in general, on racial politics, Justice Thomas is very conservative, but he also brings from his experience as a Black American things that otherwise would not be contributed to the way the court addresses issues and solves problems.
I want to stick with the Supreme Court, Professor, if I can, for just a moment. In your book, you highlight the Harvard Plan and Archibald Cox's role in presenting it to the Supreme Court. What made Cox's argument so influential that it helped shape Justice Powell-Backey's opinion and essentially defined how the court understood diversity for decades?
Well, one answer to that is that Cox was a brilliant lawyer, one of the great lawyers of the 20th century, and he had a very deep understanding of the value of diversity. A second is that his timing was just perfect in that this brief got in front of Justice Powell at a point when Justice Powell was looking for some alternative between racial quotas, which he found highly offensive, and not doing anything in terms of allowing universities to, as a matter of academic freedom, pay attention to race in admitting a student body. And so Powell, finding the Cox brief, arguing how Harvard should be allowed to continue to use diversity as part of its application process, was very, very convincing. And I will say, in Harvard's history, in 1909, when the president of Harvard stepped down after 40 years and was asked, what are you most proud of? This is over 100 years ago. He says, I'm proud of the diversity of
Hmm.
Harvard University and Harvard College in terms of our racial diversity, our ethnic diversity, our diversity of class, our diversity of point of view. All of this is part of what makes this a great college and great university.
Given how polarized things are feeling right now across the country, how are universities trying to keep a healthy mix of viewpoints on campus while also navigating this whole political pressure that they're under?
Well, of course, every university approaches it differently, and every department within a university approaches it differently. But I think what I'm seeing is greater recognition that it's important to have a broader set of views represented among students and faculty, and to highlight the importance of that greater set of views, along with a commitment to continuing to talk about the value of diversity, explore the value of diversity, conduct research about the value of diversity, and make all of our students feel welcome, regardless of where they are on a personal or political point of view.
Some critics claim that diversity initiatives are ideological or even vague. How does your book challenge that framing?
Well, first of all, some diversity initiatives are ideological, and that's a problem. There's no kind of system which is perfect. There are no programs that are perfect. But largely, the point of diversity initiatives is to expand our knowledge by expanding the voices in the room, making sure that there's room for everyone to participate, because what we know is that when you allow outsiders as well as insiders to be part of the discussion, when you let people with different backgrounds and experiences be part of the discussion, they make better decisions. In a classroom, they learn more. Again, in a science lab, they make more significant discoveries. We know this. For years, this was a theory, but now we've got about 40 years of scientific studies that tell us that diversity really does make a difference.
You describe a growing field called diversity science. What is that?
Well, it's psychology, it's sociology, it's the science of economics and of business. There are scholars and scientists across multiple fields who are examining the question of whether diversity has measurable value. They're measuring it in terms of how our legal system works. They're measuring it in terms of what happens in a science lab. They're measuring it in terms of what happens in a classroom. When I make these statements about the benefits of diversity, I'm relying on the findings of diversity scientists.
Big picture, Professor, what's at stake for universities, corporations, democratic institutions if diversity principle is weakened?
Well, I'm going to give you a personal opinion. You and I, and most of the people watching your show, live in the greatest country in the history of the world, with, among other things, the greatest economy that the world has ever seen, the greatest universities that the world has ever seen, the greatest system of science and scientific inquiry that the world has ever seen. And all of those are built on the success of our diversity. It is in part because the United States is so diverse that we have been so extraordinarily successful. And I think that if we abandon the recognition of the value of diversity, we threaten our success as a nation and as a people. So I think there's a great deal at stake. But again, that's a personal opinion that comes out of my research, but I can't point to the empirical evidence of that the way I can to the fact that the diversity principle is real and diversity really makes a difference.
Well, let's dig in a little bit more on not so much your research, but let's talk about your experience. How has your own experience of teaching and researching civil rights shaped your understanding of diversity?
Well, okay, so level one, I've had the benefit of having an extraordinary group of students and an extraordinary group of colleagues at Berkeley, and the diversity of our university, even after Proposition 209, which really reduced the racial diversity here, but there are so many kinds of diversity here that I've benefited from enormously in terms of what I've learned. So at one level, it's simply working in and doing research in a diverse environment, having students from poor families, having students of color, having women students pointing things out that I, as a white man, might well not have seen.
Mm-hmm.
At a second level, and this is more complicated, but it's one of the interesting findings of diversity science. When we are in more diverse groups, we are less comfortable. When we're in a group where we think of everyone as being just like us, we can let down our guard, we can be comfortable, we don't have to be careful about what we say. When we're in a group that's more diverse, we're less comfortable, and discomfort, the friction caused by discomfort, helps us to see things we wouldn't have otherwise seen. So it's not at that level that diversity is sort of more fun, but that it's more productive because it pushes us, it pushes our boundaries. And particularly in a university, that's what we want. We want our boundaries to be pushed.
What do you hope readers and especially policymakers take away from your book?
I hope that they'll recognize that diversity is an old idea that has a storied history, and that we know through experiential work that diversity really has value, and we should not dismiss it by reducing it to simply a political slogan. We should engage it. And if we disagree about it, we should engage with each other about it.
Berkeley Law Professor David Oppenheimer. The book is titled The Diversity Principle. Where can we find more information on the book, David?
Well, you can buy it, of course, wherever books are sold, including the online services like Amazon. I also have a website where there's more information about the book. It's diversityprinciple.com.
Perfect. Thank you, David, for your time. I sure appreciate the insight.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a good weekend. All right, 48 past the hour. We'll take a break. We'll come right back with today's top headlines and a look at your entertainment update next.